One email. One message. One resignation letter. Because the moment it leaves your hands, the world rearranges itself around a choice you can't unsay. You can still back out, until you can't. That sensation has a name older than most nations: crossing the Rubicon. It means making a decision so final that turning back stops being an option, not because you're brave, but because the bridge behind you is gone. And it still matters today for one reason: modern life gives us infinite choices, right up until the second we choose. To find where this phrase was born, you don't need a grand battlefield at first. You need a small river. A modest ribbon of water in northern Italy, so unimpressive that, if you saw it today, you might mistake it for a ditch that got ambitious. And that's part of the point. History doesn't always happen in giant places. Sometimes it happens where nobody would bother taking a picture. It's the winter of 49 BCE. Cold enough to bite through wool. The land is dim, the sky heavy, and the roads are slow with mud. Rome is the superpower of the Mediterranean, but it's also something more fragile: a political machine held together by law, reputation, and the fear that one man might decide he's bigger than the system. Gaius Julius Caesar is not marching toward glory. He already has it. He's conquered Gaul, won wealth, won loyalty, won a name people whisper like a spell. The Senate isn't impressed by your resume when they think your resume is a weapon. Dismiss your army before returning to Italy. Because Roman law drew a boundary. A general could not bring his troops into Italy itself. It was a safeguard, one of the few that kept commander from becoming king. Disband the legions, come home as a citizen, and let the Senate decide your fate. And here's the part that makes the whole scene feel less like legend and more like a modern power struggle. Caesar didn't just fear losing office. He feared prosecution, humiliation, political ruin. A system can forgive many things, but it rarely forgives a man who becomes too visible. If he returned alone, enemies could dismantle him in public. If he returned with soldiers, he would become the enemy in a single step. So he approaches the river that marks the line. The water is dark. The banks are slick. Somewhere, a horse snorts into the night. Leather straps creak. Metal shifts and whispers. His men, veterans who've marched behind him through forests and blood and winter, wait without talking too loudly, as if the air itself might report them. And Caesar pauses. Later writers describe him hesitating, as if he can feel the weight of the Republic on his shoulders like a cloak soaked in rain. Some accounts claim he spoke words that became famous: alea iacta est, the die is cast, though historians debate exactly what he said, and whether the phrase was polished by storytellers after the fact. That's what history does. It edits reality into something sharp enough to remember. But the hesitation feels real, because anyone who has ever stood at the edge of an irreversible moment knows the silence right before it happens. Then Caesar steps forward. Not with the drama of a movie hero, but with the plain brutality of a decision. The legions follow. Boots press into mud. Water ripples. A simple crossing turns into a thunderclap. And Rome's legal boundary becomes Rome's broken promise to itself. Because once Caesar crosses the Rubicon with an army, it is no longer a debate. It is no longer politics. It is civil war. This is where the phrase takes its power, not from the size of the river, but from what the river represents. It represents a system trying to protect itself from ambition. It represents a rule made for exactly this kind of man. And it represents a truth that still makes people uncomfortable: laws are strongest right before they're tested by someone who believes they don't apply to him. Here's a detail most people miss: even the Rubicon itself is a kind of historical ghost. The exact river that marked that boundary has been debated for centuries, because landscapes change, names drift, and the earth doesn't care about our narratives. The river's identity matters less than its function. It was a symbol as much as a place. In other words, Rome built a line in the sand, and Caesar proved sand is easy to kick. And that's the thriller part. Not the marching. Not the armor. The real suspense is the question Rome couldn't answer in time: what do you do when the rules only work on people who already respect the rules? When Caesar crossed, cities didn't instantly explode. The world didn't end in a single frame. Many Romans likely woke up the next morning and went about their business. Bread still baked. Markets still opened. That's another haunting truth. History's greatest turning points can be quiet at first. Catastrophe often begins as paperwork. Then the panic spreads. Senators flee. Alliances crack. Friends choose sides. Caesar moves fast, because speed is a weapon when legitimacy is contested. And every step forward forces everyone else to step forward too. Neutrality becomes dangerous. Silence becomes a vote. A line you cross. A gift you accept. A door you open. So why does this story still cling to us? Why do we still say crossing the Rubicon when we quit a job, announce a breakup, launch a risky business, or expose a secret? Because humans repeat the same pattern across different costumes. We stall at the edge, we negotiate with ourselves, and then we do the thing that changes everything. At work, it's the moment you sign a deal that locks your company into a direction it can't afford to reverse, even if the market shifts overnight, and you call it strategy because panic doesn't look good in a meeting. In politics and society, it's the moment a leader uses a temporary emergency measure that becomes permanent, because power almost never returns itself politely once it learns what it can get away with. In relationships and tech, it's the moment you post the screenshot, hit publish, share the private message, or go public with something that can't be gathered back into your pocket, because the internet is not a conversation, it's an archive. Underneath all of those is the same psychology. Once we commit publicly, we become prisoners of our own momentum. We hate uncertainty more than we hate risk. We'll choose a hard future we can explain over a safe future we can't predict. And sometimes we cross the line because we're tired of standing there, pretending the line isn't real. Now for the uncomfortable part, the part that turns an old Roman story into a mirror. Theory 1. Crossing the Rubicon survived because it's a social safety label, like high voltage. Societies need phrases that warn people about thresholds, points where a private choice becomes a public event. Rome tried to encode that warning into law, but language did something law can't. It followed humans into every era. When a culture repeats this phrase, it's not admiring Caesar, it's reminding itself that some actions rewrite the rules for everyone. And that's why the phrase feels so heavy. It carries the memory of a system failing its own test. Theory 2. The phrase survives because humans use language to borrow courage. We name the irreversible moment so it feels less like chaos and more like destiny. Crossing the Rubicon turns fear into a story we can tolerate. I didn't act recklessly. I crossed a threshold. It's the same trick we use when we call a gamble a leap of faith. Naming doesn't change the consequences, but it changes how we stand inside them. That's why the phrase shows up when people are about to do something terrifying. Language becomes emotional armor. Theory 3. The most dangerous thing about crossing the Rubicon is that it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The moment you label a decision no turning back, you stop looking for exits that might still exist. Caesar's crossing didn't eliminate all choices, it narrowed them and polarized everyone around him. In modern life, declaring a point of no return can shut down negotiation, creativity, and humility. Sometimes the line is real. Sometimes it's drawn by pride. And the phrase can be used as a justification, an elegant way to say, I've already decided, and I'm done listening. Here's the twist. When people talk about Caesar, they often picture unstoppable confidence. But the Rubicon story, especially the hesitation, suggests something darker and more human. Not a man without doubt. A man who felt doubt and stepped anyway, because the cost of stopping felt worse than the cost of burning the world behind him. And that's the moral most people miss. Crossing the Rubicon isn't just about bravery. It's about the moment a person decides that consequences are acceptable collateral. So maybe the expression isn't a celebration. Maybe it's a warning disguised as a phrase. A reminder that the biggest danger isn't the river, it's the part of you that starts craving inevitability. Remember this, the most irreversible decision is the one you make just to end the suspense. A line you cross. A gift you accept. A door you open. If that landed a little too close to home, good, that means the phrase is doing its job. If you enjoyed this kind of story, like the video and subscribe to Origins, because your future decisions deserve at least one dramatic narrator in the background, and I volunteer as tribute. Next time, we're stepping off the riverbank and under a throne, into the sword of Damocles, where power doesn't feel like victory, it feels like something hanging above your head. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to support us, and join us for the next story.